but instead October.
Thank you.
Right. Based on what you're saying, any idea when budget is going to be held this year?
I expect that it should be in a few weeks' time. Can't give you the specific date yet because we haven't settled on a date, but within a month or so.
All right. On page 3 of the central bank press release, there was a mention made that the deficit, according to that report, was $360 million. Was financed largely by a reduction of government deposits in the banking system in the amount of $235 million. The remainder was financed by the drawdown of government's deposits at the central bank and national insurance. Has government been utilizing sinking funds to finance government expenditure?
Thank you very much for that question. Now, as you know, the laws of Barbados, as it pertains to various types of loans, special loans, local loans, well, not the external so much in this particular regard, the debentures under the general loans provisions allow for sinking funds or provide for sinking funds to be created and set aside for the servicing of those loans and the redemption of those loans at the time of maturity. Those funds are held in special deposits, and parts of those funds, including those in the CAP 104 supplementary sinking funds, are invested are allowed to be invested in special securities or approved securities across the financial system, both here and externally. In some instances, some of those resources are put in various instruments in commercial banks, savings instruments, for which they receive interest, of course, to help augment them. Now, sinking funds are used, as I said, for the redemption of loans when they become due, or to pay the interest, or assist in paying the interest of those loans, servicing those loans when necessary and required. When those funds are not required to be used, they then have to be, as you would imagine, put in somewhere that they can earn a return. In the last few months, we have noticed that in some instances, some of the instruments into which those investments have been, those funds have been invested, particularly in the commercial banks, have expired. And the commercial banks, because of excess liquidity, have returned those funds to the central bank. As that is the case, those will then sit in deposits where they're not earning anything. And therefore, the responsible thing for any fiscal agent to do is to look at those and to see where it can be safely invested so it can get a return. Because obviously having money sitting in a deposit in a bank somewhere or at the central bank earning nothing on it, it really is a wasted opportunity. And so since there is no, as far as I recall, no safer instrument than government paper, from time to time, if it is necessary, the government utilizes those funds under the instruction from Minister of Finance as per the law for those to be invested in government paper. And that has certainly happened. Now, we could take it and send it overseas. We could convert it into foreign exchange and send it overseas to finance somebody else's expenditure or deficit, or we could utilize it here in Barbados. And given that the government still runs a deficit and still requires financing, we thought that it is a useful thing to assist with government's efforts to ensure that we continue to provide for the citizens of Barbados.
Emmanuel Joseph, Barbados Today. You did say in your opening speech that the country can achieve the 6.6% without any further major dislocation. The operative word is major. If you tie this into what the governor said, that we will need further expenditure adjustments to achieve that, tie the two together and tell us exactly what this will mean.
And let me explain, because I think I saw a lot of stuff that kind of mischaracterized what the governor would have said to some extent. what the central bank would have been reporting to some extent. As I indicated in the statement, our expenditure figures are pretty much where we expected them to be. In fact, let me see if I can do it from the beginning. At around this time of the year, we normally establish ceilings for which we send to ministries, indicating what is the level of deficit the government is expected to or would like to see, the Ministry of Finance and the government would like to see for the following financial year, and that includes the ceilings on expenditure. Of course, we do a revenue estimate as well, but for the purposes of spending, we send it to them. Ministries are asked to then indicate what are their spending priorities, and they do so. Some come in under the ceiling, some come in on top of the ceiling, others come above it. We then have an exercise in this room or elsewhere in which we have a negotiation on the priorities of the ministries. The goal is for the Ministry of Finance to achieve the target ceiling to help us get to the deficit figure. Of course, the goal of the ministries is to try to get as much money as they can to execute their programs, all of which are very good programs. And after that negotiation, we settle on an amount. So sometimes we have to cut. And that cutting takes place at that stage. Beyond that, if we don't find agreement and there is still a way out of ways out from what we projected, the ministry then does an internal exercise where we make the adjustments and then we notify the ministries. So that expenditure budget is taken to Parliament along with the revenue estimate, and that is what forms your estimates of revenue and expenditure. So when we say that we want to get a deficit of 6.6%, the expenditure adjustments have already been made. We've already made those expenditure adjustments. The revenue, of course, is a forecast because nobody knows what revenue exactly would be until it starts to perform. Throughout the course of the year, as is the case with this one, we are at the 6-month stage. We look at the figures and we see on the projection, expenditure is sitting down exactly where we expected it to be for this time of the year. We then look at the revenue and we notice that the revenue is slightly up above what it was last year. In fact, were it not for a timing issue in relation to land tax, because the land tax bills went out a month later this year than they did last year, we would probably be up about $50–60 million on revenue over last year. However, we are below what we would have projected, what we would have forecast revenue to be. And there are a number of factors for that in terms of economic buoyancy, maybe a slowing of the collections process, in terms of people not paying in on time or in full, whatever the case may be. So those are issues that we work on. So that's how you establish where the gap is. And our projection is going forward that we will probably be looking at $150 to $170 million of a gap. Now, that does not mean that we have to go and tax people $174 million. I think that's the impression that was being given. Where is the government going to get find taxation of $174 million? Of course, in 6 months to pull that off really will be a huge task in this type of economy anyway. It doesn't mean equally that we have to go cut $174 million either in total. Doesn't necessarily mean that as well. Or that we have to go and borrow $174 million. That's not what it means. What it means is that we have to do a combination of those, and that combination is called the adjustment that is required. Now, as I would have noted last year, because in Barbados we don't do it quite like some other countries. Some countries have two estimates during a financial year. They have the first one, and then they come with a supplementary estimate, which is presented almost identical to the estimates that are done in March. We do supplemental votes, but we don't do it collectively and bring it as a new estimates document. We do supplemental votes. And in the course of last year, for example, where you saw that spike in the deficit, we did about $382 million of supplementaries. There were 18 in all, and I think the value was about $382 million. So very early we have identified through working with ministries from the beginning of the financial year that that exercise and that process could not repeat itself this year if we wanted to achieve the target. So what we have already put in train is work to ensure that we keep that figure below $100 million so that you do not get this explosion of the deficit to put additional pressure on you. So if you can glean off $100 million from what you would have normally had to do, or $200 million, you automatically begin to see that your deficit is not going to approach anywhere where it was last year. Additionally, as I said in the thing, we continue to be vigilant in implementing fiscal adjustment. And this is not, it's not a straight line. It is not a perfect situation. You look at it and you see where you are at. And so if we say, for example, that we want to get an additional, say, $30 million in cuts, so $50 million in cuts across ministries, you spread that across as thinly as possible so that the impact would not be as dramatic as if you had to do $174 million in cuts. No, hold a second, I'm not finished. And then laterally, you look at your tax system and you see where there is scope for first enhancing your tax collection process so that you bring in more revenue than you would normally expect to based on the efficiencies of tax collection. And that is what we are looking at. So you would have seen from the five points that I've indicated, these are the areas that we are looking at and what we're intending to do. Some restrictions and discipline on the non-supplementaries, some additional smaller cuts in the government's budget in non-critical programs. The tax reform process will begin, and there are some short-term measures that we may introduce in terms of broadening the tax base and not necessarily inducing new taxes or increasing rates, but broadening the base so we capture more people in the system and therefore you get more revenue out. And again, the tax administration efficiencies, which the Barbados Revenue Authority has already begun to show tremendous gains in doing as we push that forward. So that is how you get to your adjustment going forward.
So will any of these cuts mean any further layoffs?
No, that is why I said not in any major or dramatic way, as we would have seen last December. As you know, there is a process of reforming statutory entities. For example, we've moved ahead already with the proposed merger of Sports Council and Gymnasium. We expect to add COMI to that once the Cabinet approves that particular part. We have also signed off, and it has to go to Cabinet, but we've also signed off for a merger between the Barbados National Oil Company and the National Petroleum Corporation as well. We're looking at other agencies, but those have to be approved by the Cabinet, and I believe that will be done shortly. And in that exercise, it is normal to expect that there will be some attrition, because if you have two entities that have I shouldn't call positions, but have two of similar positions, and you merge them, and you do not need both, then of course one may go. So you will find that there may be some smaller attrition in terms of retrenchments because of the exercise, but not the 3,000 or the 1,500, not that type of thing, no.
Just permit me to ask this relevant question, and I will let you go. The Chamber of Commerce has said that is like a dream, so to speak, to achieve the 6.6, considering that you're just quarter way on your way,
yes,
and you have a lot more to go, and that you might have to extend in 90 months.
Okay.
How do you respond?
But you see, that's the point. That's why I took the time. It was a little elongated, sorry, but that's why I took the time to explain how the public finance system works. The Chamber of Commerce, I'm not going to respond specifically to the Chamber of Commerce, but I'm going to explain and say that a significant part of the adjustment that we have done, we have already achieved. We have a balance of 2%. If you're coming from 12 and you're going to 6.6 and you have a balance of 2 to achieve in the next year, that will tell you that you have achieved more than quarter way, wouldn't it? So therefore, but you have to understand, because those adjustments are made up front. What happens in Barbados, and has happened for many years, it is only now showing up because revenue is weak. What has happened for many years is that there has always been an explosion of supplementaries at the end of the financial year that have caused expenditure to balloon. And what we're saying is that we have put systems in place to ensure this year that that does not happen, so that when we examine it and we look to see, it means that the target which we have identified becomes even more achievable. If, of course, we break down in that discipline and we allow those things to creep in, then it becomes even more, more difficult to achieve, and you go up into 200 and 300, and then it really becomes, ridiculous. And that is what we are guarding against, have been working very diligently on, and feel confident that we can restrain without causing, as I said, any major dislocation in the country.
Good evening, Mr. Sinckler, Chairman, Examination. The major question that has been asked over the past couple of months, past couple of weeks, has been the issue of the bursaries for university students. It's almost halfway the academic year.
Yes.
Are those bursaries coming? Have you approved the financing for those bursaries?
Well, let me put it this way, and I saw a lot of the comments in the paper. Some of them very unfortunate. In fact, the most unfortunate is that private correspondence between the whoever, because I didn't actually see the letter, but private correspondence between the Ministry of Finance, officials in the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Education found its way into a local newspaper. But I guess that's the times that we're living in. But let me say that as far as I know, bursaries will be delivered. The Ministry of Education was advised, and I understand that they have taken that advice. I've spoken to my colleague. In fact, Minister Jones, people say they wonder if we operate in the same government. He actually sits right next to me in cabinet. So I know that he knows very well that, and has worked on it, that we get requests from ministries for supplementaries, again, every year. And I mean, often. And we have to say, in fact, the majority of them, we have to say no to. And we always do that based on what we know is available. Because it makes no sense, approving a supplementary if you know you don't have the money to satisfy. So when this issue was broached, we indicated to the ministry that we would support bursaries as long as the ministry can identify savings within their budget to pay for those bursaries, because there was no new money in the Ministry of Finance to give to that particular cause. I am confident, and I have been advised, that the ministry, by the minister himself, no less a person, has identified where those savings will come from, and will be making the necessary, or have in fact made the necessary recommendation to the Ministry of Finance for approval, and it will be approved. So they will get the bursaries. I can't tell you when, but so long as they have identified where the savings are coming from and they have the money available to them, they can go ahead and start anytime that they so desire.
The private sector in its post,
I think it's about 4 million.
Statement suggested that they are not being consulted.
The private sector?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Enough.
Mm-hmm.
So far, we've been told that no consultations have taken place with the private sector regarding the budget, this coming budget.
Mm-hmm.
When do you expect to begin speaking with the private sector to hear what they may have, their input really, into the 2014-2015 budget?
Well, we normally have a process. Nobody, but certainly the private sector, doesn't know when the budget is. We normally set a process, and as you know, we invite all of the private entities, stakeholders to come, and we meet with them. But outside of that, we hear them quite often. They have their say. Most of them, if you don't hear them privately, you certainly hear them publicly. They issue statements on all types of things. They make submissions, as is their right to do, on various aspects of government policy. So, whilst the tradition has been to have a grand thing where you invite everybody up here and you sit down and they make a presentation and you have a back and forth and so forth and so on, and that tradition will continue, we are pretty much familiar with what the private sector has been recommending because they have been doing so consistently. Now, I must make the point, though, that and I heard these comments coming from the head of the Private Sector Association about government and the Chamber of Commerce as well, about government coming to them and presenting its program every few weeks or something like that. And that's not how it is done. Reports on the Barbados economy are done by the central bank. The Ministry of Finance do periodic press conferences, periodic press releases. We release information through the Division of Economic Affairs on all aspects of the economy, whether it's prices, employment, whatever the case may be. This is done routinely. Now, I don't know what else people expect. I'm at a loss as to what else they expect us to do in the circumstances. If it is that they expect that we're going to have every 2 weeks a sit down and officials of the Ministry of Finance and myself are going to report on everything that's happening on the Barbados economy point by point, I don't think that that is a useful exercise because a lot of the data which we receive, we ourselves have to be constantly checking and rechecking and so forth and so on. So it is a very dangerous thing to be giving people data that we are not ourselves entirely satisfied or sure about in terms of its finality. And I keep explaining this to the private sector, that it doesn't quite work that way. Even the figures which we would have given you here, these figures, by the end of the next quarter, some of these can change, and probably will change, based on additional information that is brought in. So therefore, what we give out and what we engage, I think, is useful. But I must add that an exercise is being conducted, and the acting director of finance, who of course is the substantive PS Economic Affairs, can tell you about this. An exercise is being conducted for the reform of the Barbados Statistical Service. And one of the things that we are going to be doing in those reforms, and that is at a very advanced stage, is to set a legislative calendar for the reporting on the economy by the Statistical Service and by other entities in the system responsible for sharing of economic data and financial data with the public. And that is to bring a level of certainty and transparency to the process. The consultants, this IDB project, the consultants are very far advanced in their work. It would involve an entire reform and restructuring of the Statistical Service. Yes, and we will, but that will, be more akin to what you will see in developed countries, so that you know the dates on which this information is coming out, just as you will see in the United States. People know when employment data is coming, when GDP data is coming, and so forth. We're moving to that process, and that work is at an extremely advanced stage with just legislative and executive cabinet decisions to be made in that regard.
The tens of thousands of Barbadians who are working must be asking, Mr. Sinckler, give us a clear statement. Are we going to be taxed anymore, considering we are already overtaxed?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, I would tell you, but I don't know the answer to that right now. What I can tell you, though, is that it is not our contemplation for any major increases in taxes, impositions. In fact, we may very well be looking over the short to medium term if we can broaden the basis to reduce some of the incidence of tax on Barbadians. That's really where our goal is. But of course, as you know, we have a fiscal program in place. We want to achieve certain targets, and therefore we have to stick to what we have for the time being.
Aside from the bursaries, Minister, perhaps the other hot topic is about income tax refunds.
Yes.
You have spoken to this recently and spoken of the cash flow challenges that is experiencing. Given the fact that you're having to go with cuts, obviously to meet deficit targets, is it a situation where now you have to extend the date, because as we know the interest factor comes in.
Yes, and that's a very good point. Of course, as you know, or as we should probably explain, shouldn't say that you know, refunds of all types, income tax, VAT, whatever the case may be, are paid from revenue. They are a docket on your revenue. There's no special fund that is kept anywhere out of which these returns are paid. They are paid from revenue. As revenue comes in, then those returns are paid out of the revenue. If there are cash flow or revenue shortages, then you could expect that there will be a slowing of that process. And that has happened. Some other issues have come on board as well. The establishment of the BRA, particularly for things like VAT and so on, that have delayed those returns processing is a major issue, of course, and the limitation of human resources to do this. But the principal issue has been the availability of actual cash to pay those returns. We have started paying returns. People have gotten some of their returns as well, and we will continue that process apace. Of course, the point that you made is a very critical point, that interest kicks in after a certain point in time, and we don't want that interest cost to explode and then, cause us a different headache. So we are trying as much as possible as we get the revenue, we have the space to pay. If we can't do that at a fast enough rate or large enough rate, then we would have to look at other instruments that may be necessary to achieve that process.
Do you have a target in mind in terms of when you'd like to finish that process?
Well, I would like to finish it as soon as is humanly possible. But again, that's in keeping with the situation. And I know it has been very disconcerting and discomforting for many Barbadians. And of course, we apologize for that circumstance. And we ask Barbadians to be patient. We know a lot of people rely on that. We try to get out, as certainly the smaller amounts, to those persons who rely on those to do things like back to school and so forth and so on. But it is a tight situation, and we ask for the patience of Barbadians in this regard.
Just a quick question. You talk about the private sector and now the Barbados advocate. And we've heard in the private sector some saying that the government is moving too slow, some of the gaps are not closing quick enough. We had the public sector retrenchment, and we heard in the chamber when they had a meeting about going to the IMF for financial agreement. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, we are not satisfied with the pace either. We feel the pace could be greater, but we have to look at the type of economy we have and deal with the realities of what we have before us. We have a very large social sector in Barbados that we've afforded an extremely high quality of life for Barbadians. And anytime you're doing major adjustment in an economy of this nature, it is going to affect those areas: education, healthcare, social welfare, community development, you name them, across the spectrum. And though you want to achieve targets in the fastest possible time, you still have to be mindful that you're operating within a fairly small space with a fairly vulnerable population, that if you do too much too quickly, you can actually unravel the entire society. And that we do not want to have happen, because there are persons who are, making it out on a daily basis, but not necessarily so far above the water level that they can't slip below. And we don't want that situation to happen. So we have to be very guarded and mindful of what you're doing. The second point is we have not been helped entirely in this race to get our deficit down with the or by the growth in revenues. These have been slower than we have anticipated. We understand that to some extent, because if you do a heavy set fiscal program, particularly with expenditure cuts and taxation, you tend to find that aggregate demand contracts, and when that contracts, economic activity contracts, GDP contracts, and you don't get as much as you want. We have to look at what the overall objective is. The overall objective is to ensure that we have adequate levels of foreign reserves, foreign exchange in the country, to keep us in the game. That we have achieved. Now, having achieved that, we're looking at ways in which we can work around those situations, use that stability to achieve greater levels of revenue through increased economic activity. Now, I heard the private sector speaking, and I share some of their views. But I also have to make the point that we have, over the last few years, put so many things in place. I mean, incentives, concessions, waivers, partnerships, in which government has taken on a greater part of the risk than even the private people, to accommodate the private sector, to invest in our economy. And that is why I believe that one of the things that we would like to hear from the private sector more often is not so much what government should or should not be doing. We encourage them to say that. But we also want to hear from the private sector what are they proposing to do to get our economy going. If this is going to be a private sector-led economy, and I did hear the president of the Private Sector Association say he's not sure what words to the effect that he wasn't sure what it is that the government or the central bank expected from them in terms of private sector. We expect investments. We expect them, people who are sitting on the fence, and it's not all of them, because there's some very aggressive people in the private sector who have not stopped investing, and we know who those persons are. But we are saying that the incentives have been there. We have done waivers of for the private sector of debt owed to government, whether it is to the various taxes, VAT, and so forth and so on. We have done those things. We are saying the foreign private sector expresses higher levels of confidence in what is happening in Barbados than sometimes our domestic folks. And that mixed match needs to be changed, because the domestic people should be driving what is happening here, even as we invite those from outside to come in. So we're saying that we need to work together. They have some legitimate points that we take on board, of course, but we feel that that can happen a lot faster if, in terms of economic growth, if they come on board with us and they come on board with the country and let us move forward. Now, in relation to the discussion about going to the IMF, we have said what our position is. We are not contemplating any IMF program at this stage. We do not think it is necessary. We believe that Barbadians can achieve the objectives of the program that we have set ourselves. It is not going to be easy or painless, but I know that the alternatives, which some people are clamoring for, will be far worse than they may suspect. So we've measured the situation, and we feel at this stage that that is not required at this stage.
Particularly the growth projections of, are you as optimistic as the government in terms of the growth projections of, I think it was 2% and
Yeah.
2.3 or 2.5?
Mm-hmm.
Are you as optimistic? Do you believe that we will achieve this?
2%, I think, is what they had said in the release. The central bank is the only institution in Barbados, the only single institution in Barbados has a complete model through which they run their figures and scenarios to arrive at growth projections. Everybody else operates short of information in one area or the other. And so they make their predictions. But they are forecasts. And the forecasts, as you know, are predictions, and nobody knows really what will happen, because you may say, I expect 3 projects to start, and they don't start. We expect more tourists to come, and they don't come. Or we didn't expect them to come, and more came than we expected. So nobody actually knows. It's just a projection. And people revise those projections and forecasts from time to time. I saw the IMF, for example, only a couple of weeks ago, reviewed and revised their projection downward based on what they had seen for the first 8 months of the year. And they are the body that is considered to be, the most expert in doing these types of things. So I think we should take it in that context. It's based on the information they have received, and they can only operate on the information they receive. It's based on their modeling, and they have said 2%. It may be 1.5, it may be 1, it may be 2.5, who knows? What we have to do is to make sure we do the things that are important to help us achieve the growth. And then we can measure it and see how well we have done. And I think we've put some of those things in place. We're having a better winter season, it looks like, by the forward bookings that I'm advised by the tourism people, both private and public. We have greater airlift coming out of our major source markets, UK, USA, Canada, and so forth and so on. That augurs well for bringing more people here because that has been an issue in the last couple of years. We know that investments are happening. We can see sandals. My ministry, officials in my ministry out of the BTI are very short, just short of signing the final document for the resources to be obtained from the government of China to do the Sam Large project. So we confidently expect that to get ahead as well. And there are other private sector projects which we know, which Minister Seeley would have spoken of, that are on the cards to happen based on what we have been advised. So based on that, based on what we're doing in alternative energy, based on the what we've seen in the growth of non-sugar agriculture, and I'm very happy to have seen the numbers and to have spoken to them last Saturday at the BAS annual conference. Based on what we're seeing, we believe that growth will return. Whether that growth will be definitely 1.5 or 2%, we cannot say. We could only give an estimate, and the estimate that the central bank has given is the one that we will all seek to work towards as we go forward into 2050.
For those thousands of frustrated and anxious CLECO policyholders, give us an update.
On CLECO? Well, the restructuring program of judicial managers has been approved by the cabinet and agreed to. We are in the process of doing a short-term refinancing of CLECO because it's at the stage where it is, it needs injection of not a huge amount of money, but a small amount of resources to keep it going. The restructuring plan will be approved by the court and executed jointly by the judicial managers and also by a new company that is being put in place and that government has established to manage the assets of CLECO in the various trusts that are to be created for such assets.
How soon with this?
It's starting all right now. And a joint statement should come out in another couple of weeks, a week or two, from government and the judicial managers explaining this entire process.
Minister, you just mentioned that protecting the vulnerable. Would this mean that in the cuts that you are proposing about non-essential aspects across the ministries, would social care and health, similar areas, get a softer blow?
Well, what you do is naturally, as anybody would do, for example, as you would do in your household, I hope, you prioritize. If you have to cut, you look at the areas that are most critical and are most sensitive. And if education and health are two of the areas that you would want to try as much as possible to stay as far away from as possible, then you do so. Of course, given all the public health issues that we have in with the various mosquito-borne illnesses and potential for Ebola or whatever the case may be, you have to make sure that you're on top of your game in that regard. So you will try as much as possible to stay away from them. Equally as well, national security. It's another area that we want to ensure that you do not compromise, because security is a large part of the stability of the country, both as a tourist destination but also naturally for Barbadians. So those types of installations, police, defense force, fire service, and so forth and so on. So you work around those and you try to isolate those, and then you would make your adjustments in the other areas that would be considered to be important but not necessarily absolutely critical.
Now, also in the central bank report, it indicated that foreign capital inflows had picked up. This was estimated at 399 million. This is compared to 173 million last year. How much of foreign capital inflows was made up of foreign borrowing? The reason I'm asking is because the report is not specifically clear if there was an increase in foreign direct investment and how much was any increase in fact.
Yes, there was an increase of over $150 million in foreign direct investment over the period for the year to date. The monies which you would have been referring to in relation to the foreign borrowings recorded for this year would have been the smaller amount of the Credit Suisse loan that we would have taken out, what we call the green shoe, of I believe $70 million, if my memory serves me correctly. That would have come in $70 million US, if my memory serves me correctly. That would have come in March. So the substantial amount of those resources that you've seen there in relation to foreign inflows are not from borrowed money.
Does the government intend to go to the international market to borrow, or are you likely to continue to do that locally? And the second question, which I probably might not get in, so I'm gonna get it now. You have come under sustained criticism for the past, from 2010, I believe, when you took over as Minister of Finance. Some people, former opposition leaders, suggested that you were a boy trying to do a man's job and said that in the House of Assembly.
Yes.
Have you at any point in time, Mr. Sinckler, considered resigning your position as Minister of Finance?
That's the question. That's the question that you wanted to. What was the first question?
My first question was whether the government was considering going to.
No. And we will not go to the foreign capital market. We're not considering it now, and our strategic position is that we are not going to go there until we get our deficit under control. We're not going to go there at the rates that are being offered. We need to do a repair job here first. So we will rely on the domestic market ostensibly. Liquidity is high in the banking system. Yes, banks and financial institutions do have limits that they can't go beyond, but I must say that they have been working with us assiduously in dealing with these issues. Nobody has run away from the government. In fact, quite a few of them have actually increased their take on government paper, particularly the shorter ones. And therefore, we're going to continue to work with the system as it is.
Before you answer the other question, the concern though has been that you are paying 30 cents of every dollar now in interest payments on debt.
Actually, it's 30 cents.
30 cents on every dollar? I'm certain that was the figure that was.
Yes, I think it's a little higher. It's still probably
It's higher than that
33.
now?
It's probably 33 cents. Yes.
All right.
To be totally honest and clear.
One criticism that has been made
Yes.
of the government is that there appears not to be a clear strategy for bringing down debt.
No, but the people who say that, it's funny, right? What we have been discussing for this entire process is the strategy to bring the fiscal deficit down. That debt is being driven by a high fiscal deficit. It's not that we're going out there borrowing money and building stuff with. That's not been happening, actually. And that is what should be happening. But you can't do that, or you're constrained to do that if you have to borrow money to do day-to-day things, what you call recurrent expenditures. So it is the fiscal. That's why we have to get the fiscal. But the people who say you have to bring down the debt, and you have to do fiscal consolidation, then go at the other side of their, on another occasion, and they will then say, but you're cutting, you're making university students pay, you're cutting this, you're cutting that, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be laying off anybody. All of the things that, unfortunately, nobody wants to do, but are required to bring your fiscal deficit down. The people who say get the deficit down don't want them to happen. But in this business, unfortunately, you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you're doing fiscal consolidation, we know that there's no painless way to do fiscal consolidation. You have to address those issues. And that is what we've been trying to do. But we've not had, the general public, I think, has given us outstanding support. People complain. If you stand up on anybody's shoe with your foot, or their foot with your shoe, they're going to say, aye. There's no way that you can do that, unless you're featherweight. There's no way you're going to do that without causing the person some level of discomfort. And we understand that. And we try to work as much as possible to lessen that rate of discomforture. But at the end of the day, these decisions are the decisions that will modulate and moderate that level of debt growth. By pulling that fiscal deficit down, pulling government out of the market for short-term debt in particular, and so that you can bring that trajectory down. Now, it's not going to happen in the short term because the deficit is as high as it is, but it is a medium-term objective. So you will see it go up as you have seen it in the short term, by some. But if you get the deficit down below a certain amount, it will stabilize, and then you will begin to see that trajectory going down. That is why these things are increasingly more important to be done, and that we have to meet those targets. And if we have revenue shortfalls, we have to find ways of boosting that revenue or find other ways of adjusting. Making cuts to expenditure, discipline or supplementaries and these kinds of things. And that's the program we're doing. If there is a better mousetrap, then I say bring it. Let us see how it is how it is going to be done. Because at the end of the day, there is no way to get a deficit down other than cutting it. Of course, if you get an explosion of economic growth, and your GDP expands, you'll see that rate coming down. But we know that in an economy like Barbados, that has not had 5% growth in years. In fact, on average, our growth has been what? 3% for the last 20, 30 years. So we're not going to see, unless something radical changes around here, like you discover oil or something like that, you're not going to get the 5 and 6 and 7% growth. So you're not going to get that. So you have to work within certain constraints. You have to focus on your medium-term growth and development strategy, do the structural changes to the economy that you require, upgrade your investment grade, which we've been doing, introduce new sectors like alternative energy, and hope that in the mix, over time, that all of those produce the type of results that you require to at least bring you to a reasonable and sane level of fiscal spending.
To what extent have your colleague,
question
Dr.
about
Eslick's
resignation,
proposals
Mrs.
have
Hold a second.
You haven't answered the question.
Yes.
About whether you consider resignation, given the criticism, heavy criticism that you've been on for years.
Well, no. The answer to that is no. I have not. And, I am a fighter. I'm not here to, I don't run away from a task, and I don't throw as the Shakespearean term will go, I don't throw my sweaty nightcap in the air because people believe that, they don't like me, or they don't like the policies I'm pursuing, or the government is pursuing, or whatever the case may be. This business is not for the faint-hearted, and is not for the thin-skinned. You have to be able to take the criticism, see the ones that are constructive, and adopt those changes that are required. The ones that are more negative, see them for what they are, and and deal with them as such. I try to do the best that I can in the circumstances. I try to benefit from the advice which I get from these guys. And of course, at the end of the day, the final decision is mine, working in conjunction with my cabinet colleagues, cabinet, and the government as a whole. And that is what we try to do. So, no, I don't walk around every day considering whether I should leave the office or.
To what extent your colleague, Dr. Eslick,
And by the way, and since you mentioned the former Prime Minister, I would like to publicly wish him all the best and a speedy recovery.
to what extent have your colleague, Dr. Eslick's proposals been factoring in this whole fiscal adjustment program?
What proposal is that?
For the reconstruction of the economy.
The reconstruction of the economy.
Yeah.
If you read Dr. Eslick's proposal, you will see a lot of what Dr. Eslick was proposing is actually being done. The only other element that I think is in there, apart from the matter of UAE, which we, I will leave him to speak about that, but I can also say that, some progress has been made in that particular regard. And it's still in gestation, but the only other aspect is the issue of debt refinancing, which again is linked to the same proposal. So we actively look at that. We don't pretend to do debt restructuring. That's one of the things that we want to keep very far away. We meet our commitments, we meet them in full, and we meet them on time. And Barbados will continue to do that. We've never defaulted on a loan, local or international, and we have no intention to do so. And I think our partners in the financial community, both local and international, understand and recognize this, and they have every confidence in Barbados to continue at that.
I just want to get in this
The
one,
minister
Joy.
is entertaining two final questions,
Yeah.
one from Ryan and one from
I
Ian.
just want to get in this. The governor's contract ends this week. Is it going to be renewed?
It has been renewed.
Mrs. Seeley, you've spoken earlier about improving the efficiency of the labor action in here.
You call me Feely?
Then we see the long lines and so here's the reason
Yes.
people waiting for hours at
Yes.
places and
Yes.
so the executive director of the BDC recently suggested extending hours of the labor action agencies so that it
Mhm.
doesn't cost production hours. Is that the consideration taken the working hours to let's say 6:30 it seems cost?
I can tell you, and if the BEC director is keen to know, that our cashiers have been working up to 8 o'clock at night. We know that cashiers close at 3, but some of our cashiers have not left office until late in the night. We don't leave anybody in the line. Now, that's not to say that the lines haven't been long. Some of that can be eased by using the facilities available. You can pay online. For example, you can pay land tax online. You can pay by check. You don't need to go and stand up in the line to pay. You can clip it on the receipt, the bill, the demand notice, and put it in the drop box. And you can spread out at the different locations. A lot of people feel, there's some people in Barbados, I should say a lot, that believe that they haven't paid a bill unless they get a receipt, one, in their hands, or that they pay the land tax at the treasury. Now, when you have a conflation of people wanting to get the 10% deposit with the monthly VAT, which comes in the middle of the month, and then you have people who unfortunately have to go there and stand up for very long times because they get caught in that to pay their driver's licenses and so forth, renew license and so forth and so on. Then you get those long lines. That will abate. We have 33 cashiers in the BRA, 33 spread across the country. We are in the process of trying to reduce the size of government and build efficiencies. I can't imagine a circumstance where people would be suggesting that we employ more people to do that job. Because what happens when this rush period settles down and there's not so much work? You'll then have to retrench them again. And in this environment, of course, you keep people on too long in the public service, they have certain legitimate expectations of staying on there for the rest of their lives. So we have to work with it. But I apologize to the public for those who have had to go stand up in those lines. It really, especially when it is, when the sun is hot. But the sun is always hot, really. But when it is humid, it can be pretty disconcerting, and especially for people who leave work to ask the boss for a half hour or 15 minutes to go and pay a land tax bill, and then 2 hours, the potential of losing their job. We have to find a better way of doing it. But in 2014, we are in the advanced electronic age. I mean, people do everything remotely from one of these phones. So why should we be having people lining up in droves to go and pay bills now? We need to move past that and get to the stage where people, if they are not comfortable with the technology, there have to be somebody in their families who know, understand, and feel comfortable with the technology to be able to go pay and do those transactions online for them. I can stay off island in New York or Miami or London or Trinidad and pay all of my bills from this phone. I can do that. Don't even go to the place where the bill is to be rendered. So in 2014, as we go forward in this new technological age, we shouldn't be having this situation with people standing in line for inordinate periods too. But it's a work in progress, and we have to see. But in terms of extended hours, I can tell you that our cashiers have been working beyond the call. In fact, only last week, I think, members of the account staff, the cashiers and others, were coming out to the BRA at the same time the board members were concluding their meeting. So that's how hard they have been working. And of course, once you finish at the desk, you have to go behind in the back office and reconcile what has happened up front there. So the work doesn't end at 3 o'clock. The work, because all of that has to be reconciled and paid into the accountant general the same day as the suite goes around the various agencies.
Minister, you mentioned about unless we get lucky and strike oil, and I couldn't help but remember the time when Ucolsi ruled in Barbados' favor about an area of ocean between here and Trinidad. Is this why a suggestion was made about the United Arab Emirates? Are we looking to them to extract the oil to repay the debt and get some profit?
No, I don't necessarily know that that's the reason why that was done. I mean, they do have expertise in that particular area and may be able to help. Who knows? And certainly we will not shy away from any help. We have our colleagues in Trinidad and Tobago. I know BNOCL has been working with them as well. In terms of helping us in that regard. My understanding from the updates that have been given by the Energy Minister, or the Minister responsible for Energy in the Prime Minister's office, Senator Boyce, is that we are at a fairly advanced stage in completing all of the necessary facilitation to allow for the seismic work and potential exploration of offshore hydrocarbon resources. And I believe a strategy has been put in place for the Energy Division to lead that process. The legislation has been changed. As you know, the Prime Minister led that debate, and those changes have been adopted by Parliament. And I also know that other things have been put in place to allow for the Energy Division to invite persons in that community to make bids, so to speak, for various rounds. You may have a bid round, or I believe they have been now given authority under the rules to be able to make direct negotiations with preferred candidates as they are shortlisted. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of the press conference. Thank you, Minister, Dr. Woodruff, and Mrs. Carter.